In the final months of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy still trusted the might of its battleships to defend the empire. To its admirals, America's small escort carriers seemed like little more than floating targets, slow, thin, and built for support, not combat. They called them baby flattops, convinced they would never stand against real warships. But history would prove otherwise. In October, near the Philippine island of Samar, those same escort carriers, together with a few destroyers, faced the largest surface fleet Japan ever sent to sea. They had no armor, carried only a handful of aircraft, and were cut off from support. Yet instead of retreating, they turned toward the enemy. What unfolded that morning was not a contest of equals, but an encounter that defied logic. The ships meant to ferry planes and supplies fought battleships, and one time for an entire invasion to survive. How did a force built from what Japan mocked as toy ships manage to halt an empire's fleet and change the course of the Pacific War? By mid-1944, control of the Pacific had shifted decisively toward the United States. After victories at Midway and the Marianas, American forces advanced toward the Philippines, the vital corridor connecting Japan to its oil supplies in the south. To defend it, the Imperial Navy prepared Operation Shogo, a last attempt to destroy the American invasion fleet through a coordinated three-direction assault. At this stage of the war, the two navies reflected opposite philosophies. The Japanese command still believed that large-gun battleships would decide the fate of empires. The United States, driven by industrial scale, relied on air power and flexible task groups. From that approach emerged the Escort carrier, a compact vessel built quickly on merchant hulls, carrying 24 aircraft and a small crew. Its speed rarely exceeded 19 knots, and its thin deck could not survive heavy gunfire. These CVE ships were never intended for direct combat. Their role was patrol, air support, and escort duty. To the Imperial Navy, they symbolized everything inferior in American design, quantity over tradition, production over honor. Yet behind them stood the might of an economy that could replace losses faster than Japan could refuel its own ships. Admiral Takeo Kurita's Central Force embodied Japan's remaining power. His flagship Yamato carried the largest guns ever mounted on a ship. Alongside her sailed Nagato, Kongo, Haruna, and 10 heavy cruisers, forming a fleet built to crush invasion forces by sheer weight of fire. Their objective was clear: pass through the San Bernardino Strait, reach Leyte Gulf, and destroy the American transports before reinforcements could arrive. The American defense was divided. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet guarded the northern approach, while Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's Seventh Fleet supported the landings. Within that structure, 3 small escort groups, Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3, maintained air cover over Leyte. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague's Taffy 3, with 7 escort carriers and a screen of destroyers, operated off Samar. Its crews believed the area secure. Heavy units were thought to be hundreds of miles away. For several days, operations continued routinely. Aircraft from the carriers bombed Japanese positions on Leyte and patrolled the surrounding seas. Mechanics worked around the clock in the tropical heat, maintaining engines corroded by salt air. The crews slept lightly, unaware that Kurita's battleships were already moving east through the Palawan Passage. Submarines Darter and Dace ambushed the Japanese column, sinking 2 cruisers, but the main body continued. On the night of October 24th, Kurita entered the San Bernardino Strait undetected. At dawn, Taffy 3's radar showed no sign of danger. Then, at 6:37, lookouts on White Plains saw gun flashes on the horizon. A moment later, the sea erupted around them, the opening salvo from Yamato's 18-inch guns. The calm before the storm was over. At dawn on October 25, 1944, Task Unit April 3rd 77, known as Taffy 3, began flight operations east of Samar. The sky was clear and the sea lay calm. For Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague and his crews, it was another routine day of air support over the Leyte beaches. 7 escort carriers formed the group's core: Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkun Bay, Gambier Bay, and Omani Bay. Protecting them were 3 destroyers, Johnston, Howell, and Heermann, and 4 smaller destroyer escorts. Their mission was defensive, provide continuous air cover, and remain far from surface combat. Unknown to them, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's central force had already emerged from the San Bernardino Strait. After surviving submarine and air attacks the previous day, Kurita's remaining battleships, cruisers, and destroyers were now steaming directly toward Leyte Gulf. Their target was the invasion transports, but Taffy 3 stood in their path, unarmored, lightly armed, and unaware of what approached. At 6:37, lookouts aboard white planes spotted flashes on the horizon. A moment later, shell splashes erupted across the sea. At first, Sprague believed it was friendly fire. Radar soon confirmed multiple large contacts approaching from the northwest at over 20 knots. Within minutes, the situation was clear. The world's largest battleship, Yamato, and a powerful fleet were closing on a group of escort carriers. Sprague ordered a full-speed turn to the south and directed every carrier to launch aircraft immediately. Planes rolled down the decks half-fueled, loaded with whatever ordnance was available, depth charges, rockets, or bombs meant for ground targets. Pilots took off into a sky already streaked with anti-aircraft fire. Those who could not launch jettisoned equipment to make room for others. The destroyers Johnston, Howell, and Heermann advanced through the smoke to form a thin protective line. Commander Ernest E. Evans aboard Johnston ordered full attack speed. His ship's 5-inch guns and 10 torpedoes were its only weapons against armor capable of shrugging off anything short of a battleship's broadside. Evans transmitted one brief message before cutting radio contact, commencing attack. Johnston charged first, laying smoke and firing at extreme range. Her torpedoes struck the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off her bow and forcing her out of formation. Behind her, Howell and Heermann executed similar attacks, drawing fire from Yamato and Congo. The Japanese line, expecting to crush helpless transports, found itself under coordinated torpedo assault from ships 1/10 its size. Meanwhile, Sprague's carriers zigzagged under incoming shells. St. Lo launched the last of her aircraft moments before explosions rocked her flight deck. Kalinin Bay took several direct hits but continued operating. Pilots, many unarmed for anti-ship combat, improvised by dropping depth charges on cruisers or strafing their bridges to disrupt gunnery crews. The persistence of these attacks gave Kurita the impression that he faced a much larger American force. By 8 o'clock, smoke covered the horizon. Johnston emerged from the haze to engage the cruiser Chikuma at close range, firing until her main battery was disabled. Heermann launched a spread of torpedoes that forced Congo and Haruna to turn away. The destroyer's sacrifices bought time for the carriers to escape southward, still under air attack and shell fire. Reports from aircraft circling above showed that the Japanese formation was losing cohesion. Several cruisers were burning, others maneuvered erratically to avoid phantom torpedoes. The constant radio chatter among Kurita's ships created confusion. Commanders overestimated American strength, believing they faced fast carriers supported by heavy cruisers. By 9 o'clock, Gambier Bay lagged behind, hit repeatedly by 8-inch shells. She slowed, listing heavily, and finally went under, the only U.S. carrier ever sunk by surface fire. Her loss shocked the formation, but did not break its resistance. Airstrikes from the remaining carriers continued without pause, adding to the impression that reinforcements were arriving. On Yamato's bridge, Kurita watched the battle unfold through layers of smoke. His ships were firing, but no clear target remained. Radio reports described multiple air attacks and torpedo waves, some non-existent. The Japanese commander hesitated. Though his fleet still outgunned the Americans, his crews were exhausted, communications scattered, and the tactical picture unclear. By mid-morning, Sprague's ships maintained distance, but refused to abandon the fight. Each minute gained drew them closer to friendly support. The air groups from Taffy 1 and Taffy 2 joined the battle, striking the Japanese cruisers from new directions. The intensity of air attacks convinced Kurita that he faced Halsey's main fleet. The spark had become a fire. Outnumbered and outgunned, the men of Taffy 3 held firm against a fleet designed to decide the fate of nations. In those hours off Samar, the outcome of the Pacific's largest naval battle began to turn, not through firepower, but through the resolve of those who refused to run. At 8 o'clock on October 25, 1944, the destroyer Johnston charged alone into the path of Japan's central force. Commander Ernest E. Evans stood exposed on the bridge, guiding his damaged ship through the haze. The destroyer's 5-inch guns fired rapidly as torpedoes raced toward the heavy cruiser Kumano. One struck home, blowing off the cruiser's bow and forcing her out of line. Within minutes, enemy shells found Johnston. They destroyed her communications, disabled her engines, and set fires across the deck. Evans ordered damage control to continue while he rejoined the fight using manual steering. Behind Johnston, Howell and Heermann emerged from the smoke to attack. Their captains launched torpedoes at ranges so close that water from shell splashes drenched the bridges. Howell drew fire from Yamato and Kongo, taking dozens of direct hits before sinking. Heermann scored near misses on Haruna and Kongo, forcing both battleships to turn away temporarily. For the first time, the Japanese line lost its formation. Sprague's escort carriers continued turning south, their decks shuddering under near misses. Fanshawe Bay and St. Lo launched aircraft as fast as they could refuel them. Many planes carried only depth charges or half loads of ammunition. Pilots, ignoring fuel warnings, climbed into storming skies and attacked at low altitude. They strafed bridges, dropped improvised bombs, and harassed cruisers already confused by smoke and evasive maneuvers. From the deck of Yamato, the scene appeared chaotic. The sea was covered in smoke trails, wreckage, and circling aircraft. Reports from cruisers claimed they were under heavy attack from multiple carrier groups. In truth, only 7 escort carriers and a handful of destroyers opposed them. The illusion of a larger fleet took hold. At 8:30, Kalinin Bay was struck by 2 shells but remained operational. Her crew kept aircraft launching through the fire. White planes narrowly avoided destruction when a shell passed through her hangar without detonating. Nearby, Gambier Bay lagged behind. With her thin armor and limited speed, she could not outrun the advancing cruisers. She was hit repeatedly, listed, and eventually capsized around 9:07. She remains the only American carrier ever sunk by naval gunfire. The destroyer Johnston, already crippled, turned again toward the enemy. Evans closed to point-blank range with the heavy cruiser Chikuma, hitting her superstructure before his ship took fatal blows from surrounding fire. When Johnston finally sank at 10:10, survivors reported their captain still giving orders. Of her crew of 327, less than half were later rescued. Above the battle, pilots from Taffy 1 and Taffy 2 arrived, adding to the pressure. Dive bombers hit Chokai amidships, detonating her torpedoes and leaving her dead in the water. Suzuya was later destroyed by internal explosions after near misses ignited stored munitions. The air assaults, though scattered, created a continuous wave of disruption. Kurita's ships began reporting phantom enemies, fast carriers, submarines, and destroyer groups that did not exist. By 9:30, Kurita's formation had fragmented. His battleships were separated from their cruisers, communication lines were jammed by overlapping signals. The heavy cruiser Chikuma sank after multiple airstrikes, and Chokai was scuttled. Despite his numerical superiority, Kurita no longer knew the position or status of half his ships. Sprague, still commanding from Fanshawe Bay, kept his fleet moving. His voice on the radio remained calm, coordinating smoke cover and directing damaged carriers to maintain southward course. He reminded his men that their duty was to delay the enemy as long as possible. Every minute counted. Each one allowed the American landing force at Leyte to remain unthreatened. At 10 o'clock, Heermann continued to duel with Haruna at extreme range. The smaller destroyer avoided multiple salvos, firing until she ran out of ammunition. Her aggressive maneuvers convinced Japanese observers they were facing multiple destroyer squadrons. Further confusion spread when aircraft reported from several bearings, leading Kurita to believe a major fleet was converging on his position. By 10:20, the Japanese admiral made his decision. Believing he faced overwhelming opposition, he ordered his fleet to disengage and withdraw northward. The largest surface fleet ever assembled by Japan began to retreat, from a group of escort carriers and destroyers never meant for battle. The sudden silence that followed felt unreal to those who remained. Fires still burned across Kalinin Bay and St. Lo, and oil slicks covered the sea. Many pilots who had ditched returned by raft to find their ships damaged but afloat. The destroyer escorts, though battered, circled back to pick up survivors from Johnston and Howell. At 10:50, a final airstrike from Taffy chased the retreating Japanese cruisers. Suzuya exploded after secondary fires reached her torpedoes. Haruna and Congo escaped with damage, while Yamato turned west without firing again. By noon, the battle was over. The surface of the Philippine Sea was scattered with debris, drifting sailors, and burning wrecks. Taffy III had lost 3 ships and over 1,000 men, but they had stopped a fleet of 23 warships and preserved the American foothold in the Philippines. Admiral Sprague's report summarized the event in a single line. The enemy turned away. Our ships, though small, had done all that was possible. The confrontation off Samar became a defining moment of the Pacific War, the last major surface engagement in naval history and the clearest demonstration that courage, coordination, and confusion could defeat even the most powerful fleet on Earth. When Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita ordered his fleet to withdraw shortly after 10:20 a.m., disbelief spread through the Japanese formation. The guns of Yamato, Nagato, and Congo were still loaded, yet the command to turn north was unmistakable. The largest surface force Japan had assembled since Pearl Harbor was abandoning battle against escort carriers. Many of Kurita's captains did not understand why. The admiral himself later admitted that he feared an ambush by fast carrier groups and believed his mission already lost. For Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague and the surviving ships of Taffy III, the end of the barrage brought only silence and smoke. The destroyers Howell and Johnston were gone, lost with most of their crews. The carrier Gambier Bay had vanished beneath the waves. The remaining ships were scarred and burning, but they were still afloat. Their decks were covered in shell fragments and leaking fuel. Mechanics fought to keep engines alive while medics moved among the wounded. Many of the surviving aircraft circled overhead, low on fuel, unsure where to land. Rescue operations began almost immediately. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, herself badly damaged, pulled men from the oil-slicked water under the threat of renewed attack. Some survivors floated for hours before being recovered by other ships. Others drifted for days, clinging to rafts under the tropical sun. They would later describe the sea as a graveyard, silent except for the hiss of burning oil and the cries of the wounded. By mid-afternoon, American aircraft from nearby groups confirmed that the Japanese were in full retreat. South of Samar, pilots sighted burning cruisers and ships withdrawing at high speed toward the north. The heavy cruisers Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya had all been lost to bomb strikes or internal explosions. Destroyers lingered to rescue survivors, reducing the Central Force's strength even further. For the United States Navy, the cost was severe, but strategically acceptable. 3 ships were lost and more than 1,000 sailors killed or missing. In exchange, the entire Japanese counterattack had failed. The invasion of Leyte continued without interruption. The victory secured the Philippines and severed Japan's southern supply line, a blow from which its navy would never recover. Kurita's decision has remained one of the most discussed in naval history. Some officers believed he misunderstood the situation, convinced that fast carriers were near. Others cited exhaustion and confusion after days of combat and poor communication. Whatever his reasons, the retreat marked the effective end of Japan's ability to wage offensive war at sea. On the American side, messages of disbelief and admiration spread through the fleet. Admiral Kincaid reported that Taffy III's stand equaled any act of heroism in naval tradition. Admiral Halsey later called it the most remarkable battle of the war. Commander Ernest E. Evans of Johnston was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the only destroyer captain in World War II to receive that distinction. Dozens of others earned the Navy Cross for actions performed under overwhelming fire. That night, searchlights and rescue teams continued to comb the waters for survivors. Many of those rescued were burned, wounded, or delirious from exposure. The oil-slick sea glowed faintly under the moonlight, marked by debris and the outlines of drifting lifeboats. For the men who survived, the sense of disbelief was as strong as relief. Their small ships had met an enemy fleet designed to dominate the Pacific, and somehow endured. Strategically, the results were decisive. The failure of Operation Shogo destroyed any hope Japan had of halting the American advance. The Imperial Navy lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, and 10 cruisers across the wider Battle of Leyte Gulf. Fuel shortages prevented further large-scale operations. After Samar, the remaining ships rarely left home waters except for suicide missions. For the Americans, the lessons were immediate. The battle proved that initiative and coordination could overcome even overwhelming odds. The escort carriers, once seen as temporary, became symbols of flexibility and resilience. Their success confirmed that air power and maneuver, not armor and size, defined modern naval warfare. The story of Taffy 3 spread quickly through the fleet. Newspapers in the United States called it the miracle off Samar. For historians, it became the last stand of the tin can sailors. The name captured both the fragility of the ships and the endurance of their crews. Against all logic, they had fought until the enemy turned away. As dusk fell over the Philippine Sea, wreckage drifted south toward Leyte. Flames still burned on the horizon where ships had sunk. The men of Taffy 3 had lost comrades, but their actions preserved the invasion, crippled the enemy, and symbolized the courage of ordinary sailors in an extraordinary moment. The battle's conclusion marked more than survival. It ended Japan's era of naval dominance and signaled the triumph of adaptability over tradition. In the quiet after the storm, the small ships that once carried the name Escort had earned another, Defenders of the Pacific. In the weeks following the battle off Samar, reports from across the Pacific confirmed what few had believed possible. A small American task unit of escort carriers and destroyers had halted the main body of the Imperial Japanese Navy and saved an entire invasion force. What began as a routine patrol had become one of the most extraordinary defensive actions in naval history. The broader Battle of Leyte Gulf had ended in total Japanese failure. Operation Shogo, designed to split and destroy the U.S. invasion fleets, collapsed on every front. Admiral Kurita's retreat from Samar left the southern attack unsupported, while Admiral Ozawa's decoy carrier force to the north was annihilated by Halsey's Third Fleet. In 4 days, Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, and 10 cruisers, losses that could never be replaced. Fuel shortages and aircrew depletion confined the remaining ships to home waters for the rest of the war. The Imperial Navy, once the symbol of Japan's reach across the Pacific, ceased to exist as an effective force. For the United States, Samar confirmed the power of adaptability and mass production. The escort carrier, dismissed as an auxiliary ship, had proven indispensable. It could launch air support, hunt submarines, and sustain ground operations with minimal resources. Dozens were built in the time it took to construct a single fleet carrier. Off Samar, these small vessels demonstrated that mobility, coordination, and willpower could defeat firepower alone. Strategically, the victory secured the Philippines and opened the route to Luzon and Okinawa. The Japanese line of supply from Southeast Asia was cut, isolating its armies and starving its industry. From this point, the war's end became a matter of time and attrition. The sea once ruled by the rising sun now belonged entirely to American carrier groups. Recognition for Taffy 3's stand came quickly. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague received the Navy Cross for command under fire. Dozens of officers and crew were decorated for valor. Commander Ernest Evans of the Johnston, killed at his post, was awarded the Medal of Honor for leading his ship into combat against overwhelming odds. His citation read simply, "He fought until the last gun was silent." The legacy of Samar extended far beyond medals. It reshaped U.S. naval doctrine, emphasizing decentralized command and rapid air response. The escort carrier's success influenced post-war designs and the creation of new task group structures that would define Cold War naval power. In every sense, Samar marked the transition from the battleship era to the age of carriers and air dominance. In Japan, post-war analyses treated the battle as a turning point in command philosophy. Kurita's hesitation, driven by uncertainty and loss of communication, became a study in how misjudgment could destroy operational advantage. Japanese historians later called it the victory of confusion, a moment where the enemy's clarity and cohesion overcame numerical strength. The battle off Samar remains a paradox of naval warfare, a triumph born from improvisation, fought by ships that were never meant for battle. Against one of the most powerful surface fleets ever assembled, a handful of destroyers and carriers held the line long enough to decide the outcome of a war. Their courage did not rest in victory alone, but in the choice to fight when retreat seemed the only option. That decision, made in smoke and chaos, ended the era of the battleship and proved that determination, guided by discipline, could rewrite the balance of power at sea. When the last survivors of Taffy III were pulled from the sea, the battle had already entered legend. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once feared across the Pacific, would never again deploy a major surface fleet. Its ships lay sunk or idle, its fuel gone, its confidence shattered. The battle off Samar proved that courage and coordination could overcome the heaviest armor ever built. The escort carriers, once dismissed as baby flattops, became symbols of endurance. Their crews had faced battleships and survived, defending the invasion of the Philippines and turning Japan's final counterattack into defeat. Historians would later call their stand the last stand of the tin can sailors, a phrase that captured both the fragility of their ships and the strength of their resolve. In the years that followed, the lessons of Samar shaped the future of naval warfare. Flexibility, communication, and the power of air groups replaced the doctrines of heavy guns and armor. The ocean would never again belong to the battleship. The ships once mocked as toys had changed the Pacific and the course of history forever. Date and location. The battle off Samar took place on October 25, 1944, east of the island of Samar in the central Philippines. It was part of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from October 23 to 26, the largest naval engagement in recorded history. Opposing forces. The U.S. Navy's Task Unit April 3, 77, known as Taffy III, was commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton A.F. Sprague. Its formation included 7 escort carriers: Fanshawe Bay, Flagship, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkin Bay, Gambier Bay, and Omani Bay, protected by 3 destroyers, Johnston, Howell, Heermann, and 4 destroyer escorts, Samuel B. Roberts, Raymond, Dennis, and John C. Butler. They faced the Imperial Japanese Navy's Central Force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, consisting of 23 major warships. The battleships Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, Haruna, 10 heavy cruisers including Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Course of battle. At dawn, the Japanese fleet surprised Taffy III from the northwest. The American escort carriers launched continuous airstrikes while destroyers charged with torpedoes and smoke screens. For over 3 hours, the smaller force resisted repeated attacks. By 10:20 a.m., Kurita, believing he faced the U.S. Third Fleet, ordered withdrawal. Casualties and losses. The United States lost 3 ships, Gambier Bay, Howell, and Johnston, and more than 1,100 sailors. Japan lost 3 heavy cruisers, several destroyers, and over 2,000 men. Outcome. Kurita's retreat ensured the safety of the Leyte invasion fleet and marked the decisive failure of Operation Shogo. The victory at Samar secured the American position in the Philippines and confirmed air power's dominance over surface fleets. Legacy. The action became known as the last stand of the tin can sailors. It remains one of naval history's most studied examples of resolve and tactical improvisation against overwhelming force.